bit of trivia for you. I know everyone harks on about the focus indicator on a Murcielago that Matt Armstrong found, so I'll give you an F40 one, and that's a Renault, most Renaults from the 80s, wheel bearing for 20 quid, but 700 quid if you want it from Ferrari. If you want a Ferrari F40, it's got to look like a Ferrari F40. So you start with a body. Ours came from America, and it's a largely fiberglass unit. There's some things that needs change on it. It's an LM. I mean, there's a central spar to put in the back and what have you. But it was, I think it was about $40,000 for the body, or pounds, I can't remember. And then there was import and taxes on top of that. So it's quite a costly body, plus body work, plus all the fixes. You know, and before you know it, you're somewhere near 60,000 in just to have a body of something that looks like an F40-ish. And then we're, ish is the wrong word, 'cause it's mint. It does look like an F40. Yes, you're about 60,000 in just to have a body of an F40. And then, because these are fiberglass parts and they are aftermarket parts, they've not really considered things like weight or material choice. They've just got the shape in there. So whilst it does look like an F40, it's not very F40 style in that the front end's really heavy, the back end's really heavy. The rear quarters are quite thick in fiberglass. They're quite hefty. So in a bid to future-proof the car and save some weight, because this car, it does intend to get used. We're going to take some moulds of the panels that we've got after some work. I mean, we've got the front end going into mould over there, so we can pull some carbon panels out, so it's going to look, you know, as it should, 'cause it's in carbon, and it's going to save a lot of weight. And then should we have a little incident at all or anything like that, when it does get used, we can just pull another panel out and keep the car on the road. To think of cost-wise, so if you were going down this route with the same body set, again, like I say, you're about 60k to get to where we've got to. But if you want to go down, say, the fiberglass copy route without all the ducts and vents that are inside these, it's quite a comprehensive kit. It'd be about 15,000 for fiberglass panels or a set of. We're going to punch out some fiberglass ones just to see how the moulds go, but we are going to go for proper infused carbon for the final pieces for this car. However you pick it, whether that's a fiberglass copy or a carbon copy or a kit like this one or whatever, the next thing you need is to mount it on a chassis, and how you do that. There's a limitless number of ways. This one was a Ferrari 328, which you can get for about 10 to 15 grand as a rolling car, and there's about 30 grand's worth of modifications, £30,000 worth of modifications to bring it to F40 spec. So we can have all the F40 arms, the geometry for the F40, and we can have all the F40 parts and pieces, the bottom on the back and the F40 subframe at the front. I'm just putting it there and everywhere. It costs about 30,000, so you're about 40, 45,000 to have a chassis like this one. So between the body and the chassis alone, there's £100,000 to get started on making what is a...
Just a shell with an out shell?
It's just a chassis with a body on it at this point, and you're 100 grand deep. So if you want to go that in depth building your own F40, before you even think about putting an engine in it, putting some wheels on it, putting a seat in it, you need 100 grand for this spec of car. So your next bit, after you've gone from your chassis, you need to get some wheels on. So how you do the suspension then, again, depends on the chassis. I mean, if you build your own tubular chassis, you can put the suspension on however you want, whether you build that to take your own suspension arms that you found. There are some tubular arms out there that do exist to suit certain uprights that have come off other cars, you know, vast amounts of kit car supplies. But on this particular one, Brett's chosen to go with original F40 parts, and because the chassis was built to an original F40 spec, the original F40 stuff fits a treat. Within reason, I'll come around to tell you why it didn't quite fit, because we've got an amalgamation of parts. So this upright alone, just the upright, so ignore the brake disc, ignore the centre lock part, and the joint. Just the upright alone, that's about £10,000. The centre lock piece, that's about £2,000. And OEM discs will cost you about £8,000. So there's a lot of money just in having that part there. But all in, just for the F40 suspension, you spent about £30,000 getting all of just the uprights and the arms, not even including the brakes. Just the uprights and the arms is about £30,000 there. Yeah, did I mention the cost? I mean, I know the 328 was 10 to 15 and 30k modifications on the chassis. If you used to have a reproduction F40 chassis without VIN, they're £120,000. Or for a chassis fabricator like me to reproduce something like this, because you've not got, you know, this. I mean, we've got one now, so I can essentially just copy it. It costs about £10,000 for someone like me to make one for anyone that wanted to build one. Nothing like a bit of self-promotion. But that's roughly the cost you're looking at to make something like that. Significant part of the car, the engine. So if you want a Ferrari F40 engine, it's about £650,000. We've gone for a Ferrari 360 engine, which was £12,000. Now to strip that down, it's going to be internally forged. To strip that down, forge it, rebuild it, manifolds, turbos, and all the etc. To make it a twin turbo engine, it's going to cost about £30,000 on top. So there's about £42,000 worth of engine to add on. On the back of that is obviously the gearbox. An F40 gearbox is between 45 and 50,000. The Ferrari 360 gearbox was about £6,000. The alternative, you could use something like an Audi twin turbo, which is about £5,000. You could use an Audi gearbox, which is about £2,000. So you could save a massive chunk of money and still have a twin turbo V8 and be mid-engined as a F40 should be. Forgot to mention the radiator. Ferrari F40 radiator, about £7,000 as well. Custom one cost you about £1,000. Maybe less, so significant savings there on the radiator. You don't even have to have it the same way, same setup, or even be as custom as that needs to be, depending on what chassis you use or how you use it. Fuel tanks are an interesting one because the originals are made of a composite and they have a lifespan. Depending on who you speak to, their lifespan is between 5 and 10 years. If you go for a 5-year lifespan, makes them quite expensive because they're a €25,000 plus VAT. So a 30,000 euro for a pair of tanks. And if you take into consideration they're a 5-year lifespan, you're €6,000 a year just to have fuel tanks. Never mind the rest of it, so fuel pumps and breathers and all that stuff. Yeah, it's €6,000 a year. It's almost like a subscription service to fuel tanks. Whereas you can get aftermarket aluminium ones now for around £7,000. Again, they don't include pumps and things like that. It's just the tank itself with foam fill. And then I made these for Brett for this car. And I think they ended up totaling around £4,000, but that included all the pumps, the breathers, the electronics, the balance pipes, and the lines to and from. So it's a bit more, as far as value for money is concerned. A bit better, and we know they definitely fit this car and the purpose in which they're made for. The Ferrari F40 has a dry sump tank. All Ferraris have dry sump tanks, dry sumps, but the Ferrari 360 engine is also dry sump, and the gearbox has the dry sump tank integrated into its spine, but we can't use that because with having turbos on it, yeah, we're going to turbocharge it as well. There's no way we'd keep it NA. In order to turbocharge it and have the downpipes run back past the engine, there's no way we could have the dry sump tank on top of the gearbox. So that had to go, but we still need a dry sump tank. And because these used to be dry sump themselves, dry sump tanks exist. I mean, that one, there's one available online at the moment. I think it was €2,500 plus VAT. And that one ended up costing Brett about £1,200 in the end, with all the, when you factor in materials, time and R&D in order to create it, ends up being quite a costly exercise. Same as anything custom, it's always going to cost more the first time. The second time, because I've done it now, there's no R&D cost in the second one and whatever else, so it end up being significantly less, same as the rest. This is the in-track suspension off an LM. Brett says he got these for about 3,000, which you can add then to the suspension cost. That's a rear, a front, and then these are the control arms off the Hartmann race car. So they've got a bit of history behind them, which is cool. Steering rack, right hand drive. It's an extended width because it's 328. You can 328, 308, 288, F40. The chassis are all relatively the same. We've still got the original 328 left-hand drive steering rack, and then we have this one here, which ended up costing us about 500 quid. But an original F40 steering rack is about £10,000. So significant saving in a steering rack. That's an original F40 pedal box. It's made of magnesium. They're about £16,000 to get one of those. So they're quite a costly unit. Something similar, you know, top down, cylinders out the back, aftermarket, you know, 600 quid will get you a really good one. So you could save 15 grand there. But as you can imagine, totaling it up with such massive figures all the way around, just because it's got the name F40 to it, gets quite expensive. This is an F40 front wheel bearing. Now, to get hold of one of these, they're about 700 quid plus VAT, but they're actually off a Renault, older Renaults from the 80s, and they're about 20 quid plus VAT. So there's a little bit of trivia for you. I know everyone harks on about the focus indicator on a Murcielago that Matt Armstrong found, so I'll give you an F40 one, and that's a Renault, most Renaults from the 80s, wheel bearing for 20 quid, but 700 quid if you want it from Ferrari. Wheels, for a genuine LM set, they're about £25,000 plus VAT, about £30,000, plus your cost of tyres. You can get, I think, Enki make a set now that's specifically for the F40, and they're about £12,000 plus taxes. These are a set that Brett had made and reproduces, and they cost about £10,000. If you wanted a set for yourself, there's a set there, £10,000 for those. And you can get aftermarket wheels that look similar, you know, not necessarily centre locks, might be the old 5-bolt, like traditional wheels. They're about £3,000. They've got a similar look, but they're not quite the same. And I think wheels, as a car person, I'm sure a lot of car people understand, wheels make a big difference to how a car looks. So you've got to get the right ones. But it's another £10,000 to the cost of building this thing. So quite a costly venture. Brakes. These are original F40 Brembos. They're anywhere between £4,000 and £5,000 a piece. So obviously 4 of those. On the upper end, your £20,000 in calipers, and then the 2-piece discs, they're about £8,000 for a set, if they're original. So you're looking at like £28,000 just for brakes, on top of the £30,000 you spent on suspension in the first place. So that's another £28,000 to add to the total of how to build this car. Seats. Seats is a fun one. The seats are for a pair of genuine F40 seats. Obviously, everything you buy genuine F40, it's all used as well, as opposed to new stuff. So a set of used F40 seats, regardless of their condition, they're £20,000, so they're quite an expensive thing. A reproduction seat like these, again in sort of carbon and Kevlar, between £4,000 and £5,000 for a reproduction seat. I mean, you can get a nice carbon Kevlar competition seat, looks similar to this, for about £1,000 a piece. So you could save yourself some money building your F40 getting those kind of seats, or you can go for the reproduction ones at £4,000 to £5,000. I've made a mould to reproduce those so that we can punch these out in a nice carbon back finish instead of the primer, and they'll end up costing about 600 quid a seat. So there's another option for you. Fiberglass would be even less, you know, or whatever. So there's another option for getting an F40 built. Right, here's my cheat sheet. You don't want all that. I have totaled it up for you. So if you used to get genuine F40 parts, you'd be just over $1 million, so 1,047,000 to get all of this in genuine. I know roughly in what Brett spent in all the parts and etc. is about £240,000 up to this point. If we was to bolt everything on, it'd look like a lot more of a car than it currently does. But if you used to give it to a handsome fabricator who built you the chassis and made you the panels, and you used a different engine, such as like the Audi engine or something along those lines, the same thing could be made for about 75,000. So it's entirely where you want to go. But either way, to replicate an F40, you've got 3 stages of 75,000, 240,000, and just over $1 million. So,
wow,
expensive thing to build.